So, rules from the past can kind of alter our perception of the past. So, for example, you might think that I saw this TV show, part of this TV show about vampires in Istanbul, and one of the vampires is like, "This soup is too salty. Your ancestor, blah blah blah, was way better." And that's like a popular misconception about food from the past not being very salty. At some point, I think it was like the early 1900s, late 1800s, someone mentioned that. So it got around that food is too salty and it's causing health problems. So people adopted this low salt policy about food, right? You try to reduce the amount of salt in your food. So you might have a grandparent who remembers things being far less salty, and your parents might prefer things a lot less flavorful than what you're used to. But in reality, salt was like a major preservative. So yeah, like, and also like there's a specific number of daily salt intake that is optimal. If you go below that number, it's actually twice as bad as going above that number. So 3.5 gram of salt per day, I think, was the optimal amount, at least for dudes. And I like my things salty. Another thing is this rule about not carrying your sword with your hand, with the blades pressed against your wrist. You wouldn't have that rule if people weren't already doing that. So carrying your sword in one hand, like walking around holding it by the pommel and the blades sticking up, you probably had people doing that. So if you think about rules about propriety and blah blah blah, and eat using this fork and knife first, and then that fork and knife, and then that fork and knife, I kind of feel like that's probably some super anal bullshit about proper ways of eating. And it was probably super anal bullshit about proper ways of eating at the time. Now, at the time, in the Victorian era and before that, I would assume people were a lot more drunk than they were in the mid-20th century when they were going to fancy restaurants, because I know that after signing the Declaration of Independence, the not-so-middle-aged men that wrote the Declaration of Independence, at the time they're probably middle-aged, closer to middle-aged, because it's like only about 200 years after the time when people's average mortality rating was like 40. So as 20-somethings, they were kind of still middle-aged, but at the time, the life expectancy in Europe would have been something like 70 years, 60 to 70 years. So it's arguable whether or not in the colonies they were middle-aged, but in reality they were in their 20s. And after signing the Declaration of Independence, America's founding fathers got hammered as fuck. I mean, sure, alcohol was a lot less potent back then, but still, 3 bottles, like that's 2 to 3 bottles per person. That's a lot of liquor, or wine, or whiskey, or whatever. Like the more I think about it, I think people from the past were a lot less cultured and mannered than you might expect watching something on TV, going like, "Here, pomposity, yeah, the Declaration of something, blah blah blah, industry, yeah, yes, I'm a man of industry, blah blah blah." I mean, these people like worked 10-hour jobs basically. Even with paperwork, they worked like very long times. I mean, like, I wouldn't expect that like half the people had at least 2 to 3 drinks in them. So, yeah, how do rules change our perception of reality?